As someone who keeps a close eye on current events, sometimes too close, the first few months of the Trump administration have been a lot to process. It's actually kind of hard to believe that it's only been 4 months because so much has happened. So, as a sort of exercise to clarify my thoughts, I'm going to lay out exactly how the actions of the current federal administration have impacted the city where I live, Lowell, Massachusetts. And then I want to pose a question, which is, how can the state of Massachusetts protect itself from the current federal administration? So let's start with how the administration has impacted Lowell. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the metaphor, don't kick someone while they're down. Don't attack someone when they're disadvantaged or already hurt. So my basic thesis statement for this video is, Lowell is down. And the current federal administration is kicking Lowell from every possible direction. One of the biggest ways they're doing that is through federal funding cuts. So I'm going to outline the cuts that have directly affected Lowell, starting from the very beginning. Now, I like to be very concrete. I like to back up what I say, so I'm going to get very granular. Okay, let's start with the very first days of the administration. Now, you may remember this. This is the end of January. The administration announced that it would be pausing all federal grants. And much like the rest of the country, Lowell was confused and thrown into a sense of panic.
The announcement certainly caused some confusion, panic.
We are all hearing bits and pieces in the media about potential impacts. I don't think anybody really knows for sure what we're looking at.
So as you may remember, this announcement kind of came out of nowhere, and it was unclear what funds the city of Lowell is going to keep and what they might lose.
It could potentially impact EPA grants for clean water infrastructure, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Community Development Block Grant programs, amongst many others.
One of them will be Rourke Bridge, and we've been waiting for, 30-something years. Hope that it doesn't affect us.
So Councillor Noon here mentions the Rourke Bridge. And for those unfamiliar, the Rourke Bridge is probably the shakiest piece of infrastructure in the city. I drive there a lot, and it has these rusty metal plates that shake a little bit when you drive. So as Councillor Noon said, replacing this bridge is very long overdue. And the idea that a federal administration would just announce a blanket pause on even the most basic infrastructure projects was a bit of a shock to me. But beyond the bridge itself, at the heart of this moment, the very beginning of the administration, was this sense that everyone was caught off guard. And people like this city manager, Tom Golden, and all these nonprofits that I'll list here, were then forced to scramble and pick apart, line by line, what funds they might be losing and how to keep themselves afloat.
Excluding the Rourke Bridge, which is much larger, but we're looking at approximately $31 million in CDBG monies, et cetera, going right through the list. We probably will have that list by the end of this week.
So as I listen to that, I can hear in Manager Golden's voice the stress that he's under. I'm sure that responding to this announcement on such a tight time crunch was probably very stressful. And what's worse is that by the end of the week, the White House rescinded the memo. Basically, they said, never mind, we'll just stop the pause. And so all this work that the city manager and all these nonprofits did at that moment was basically pointless, which leaves the question of why they did that, but I'll leave that for someone else to figure out. But what I want to show is this. To be in Lowell right now, as the Lowell Sun put it, is to experience a form of funding whiplash. There's this uncertainty that impacts the city itself and extends to every entity that holds the city together. So I'm going to go topic by topic. We're going to start with the things that bring the city joy: culture and the arts. The Lowell Folk Festival, for example, is one of the biggest cultural events in the city. U.S. Representative Lori Trahan wrote that the Lowell Folk Festival draws over 150,000 people to Lowell annually and generates $7 million in economic activity. If people in Massachusetts know about Lowell, This is usually one of the things that they know about. Nevertheless, on May 8th, the National Endowment of the Arts canceled a $20,000 grant for this year's event. So not next year's, the event that's happening in 3 months. For those that are not familiar, this was a huge deal in Lowell. The Facebook post about it was shared 629 times, which is kind of surprising. To be honest, I didn't realize there were 629 people still on Facebook. Anyway, the National Endowment of the Arts also made cuts to another cultural institution of Lowell. They cut a $20,000 grant to the Merrimack Repertory Theater. The interesting thing here is that they rescinded the funding after the theater had already spent the money. The funding had gone toward paying for a performance of a play that was called Where You Are Now. That play is set in Lowell. It was part of a series of events commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Khmer Rouge regime, the genocide in Cambodia, and the Cambodian diaspora. As you may know, Lowell is home to one of the largest Cambodian populations in the country. So all this to say, in the context of the U.S. government's budget, these $20,000 grants are nothing. But for people living in Lowell, losing these grants was devastating. Okay, we started with the arts. Next, we're going to look at cuts to health and safety. You've got the Bridge Club, a nonprofit that provides services to people recovering from addiction. They run 31 different recovery meetings, and now they're reportedly facing cuts from the federal administration. So that could mean more people facing relapse, more people with nowhere to go for help with their addiction. Next, you've got the Alternative House, a nonprofit that provides wraparound services to domestic abuse survivors. They saw over 2,000 clients last year, and half of their budget comes from federal funding. So given all this uncertainty, Executive Director Maria Crooker-Capone said, April is our board meeting to go over budget. We're presenting 2 budgets, one with federal funding, one without. If this federal funding is cut, it's going to be harder for women in danger to find help. Keeping on the theme of public safety, in April, the Lowell Sun reported that the Federal Department of Justice canceled a $2 million grant to UTEC, an organization in Lowell dedicated to preventing violence. So here's some local reporting on what UTEC does and the impact of losing that funding.
Here at UTEC in Lowell, whether they're working at the Teen Drop-In Center or are out on the streets,
Hey, what have you been up to?
Staying out of trouble.
the mission is to help young adults who had been involved with criminal activity and gangs get on a path to success.
This is about public safety, and it's about allowing young people to transform.
They have a 25-year track record of changing lives, honored from the Merrimack Valley to the White House. But last night, UTEC CEO Greg Croto got an email from the Federal Department of Justice abruptly cutting 3 of UTEC's grants to reduce violence, totaling about $2 million.
That's grants that fund our work in the streets, behind the walls, the work directly supporting young adults.
So clearly, these cuts from the Trump administration are going to lead to higher levels of crime and fewer resources for people looking for help. Moving on from public safety, we're going to look at cuts that affect people's access to food. So on March 10th, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey denounced the Trump administration's decision to cut $12 million in federal funding to provide local, healthy food to childcare programs and schools in Massachusetts. So these $12 million in cuts are going to make it so students in Lowell have less access to healthy food while they're at school. To show concretely what that looks like, we're going to take a look at some reporting from CBS Boston about the Worcester Regional Food Hub.
Federal money spent to get fresh food into our schools is now on hold, affecting kids and local farmers.
Director Sean Rainford says the hub moved $1 million worth of locally produced food to lunches in area school districts last year. Now the program could drop off.
Just another example of bad actions by Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
All because Governor Healey says the U.S. Department of Agriculture has terminated the $12.2 million in grants that were going toward farm-to-school food for next year. The USDA told Massachusetts it, quote, determined this agreement no longer effectuates agency priorities and that termination of the award is appropriate. The move could have a downstream effect on Katie Carlson's apple business. The Harvard orchard owner stacks her apples in large freezers, and when the Worcester hub needs local fruit for schools, she gets a call.
It's definitely going to hurt the bottom line. I mean, we know that this time of year we can count on the Worcester Food Hub.
In addition to this cut, on March 26th, the Lowell Sun reported that the administration cut $1 billion, a billion with a B, from food assistance programs, affecting organizations like the Merrimack Valley Food Bank. These grants help the food bank to buy food from local farmers. So cutting them will have downstream effects. For example, it'll affect local people who have small plots at Mill City Grows. The Merrimack Food Bank reported that the USDA canceled over $200,000 in food deliveries to the organization. To put this very simply, because of these cuts, families that are struggling to make ends meet will have less access to food. Moving on, let's look at K-12 education. The conversation about federal education funding has been chaotic. There have been a series of announcements of cuts. Some of them stick, some of them get walked back. Here's a couple examples. At the end of March, the administration announces that they will cut $106 million in unspent COVID funds. But then, in May, a federal judge says they have to give it back. Similarly, in March, Trump signs an executive order to close the Department of Education, possibly affecting $2 billion in federal funding to Massachusetts. But then, in May, a judge blocks that one as well. So this is what I'm talking about. When I talk about whiplash, everyone's kind of on their toes. Will it happen? Will it not? We don't know. Another example, they flirt with ending the Head Start program, an early childhood program for children in low-income families. It hasn't happened yet, but we really don't know if it's going to happen. But I want to stress that for children in low-income families, Head Start is very important for their development and school readiness. CTI is an organization in Lowell that offers these programs. And actually, rather than cut these early childhood programs, the city is actually trying to expand them. So here's Superintendent Liam Skinner during a budget conversation on May 21st.
Nowhere near enough to increase preschool that every smart community is adding. We're not even talking about that because that's silly talk. We don't have anywhere near enough funds to do things like that.
I personally happen to think that preschool should be universal. There's all kinds of life cycle benefits to that. But anyway, back to our main premise. One last example that I find very telling. In April, when there were talks of closing the Department of Education, the Lowell School Committee was afraid that we might lose some federal funding. They had Superintendent Skinner create a list of how many full-time educators, or FTEs, are funded with federal dollars. The goal was to figure out, what to do with those positions if they were cut. Now, I want you to listen to this conversation and the level of uncertainty in the air. So here they are talking about those federally funded positions that are at risk.
It's when you look at it in black and white, it's a little nerve-wracking, shall we say, because we have obviously a lot. We're talking about $10.125 million. I actually, to be honest with you, I thought it was even going to be a little bit more. I thought it was going to be up to 13 or 14 million. But it's because we don't know exactly what's going to take place on the federal level and the federal funding.
You mentioned the $10 million.
Okay.
That also accounts for 188 positions. Right?
Yeah, and what's really a bit of upsetting here is the fact that if we do have to cut, that it's our most at-risk students that are going to be put in harm's way with this, and I'm wondering what type of plan that. When are we going to know this? By the way, when are we going to know whether we're getting the money and whether it's at its fullest capacity or not. Do we have any idea on that at all?
Yeah, a similar motion, Mr. Conway, at a council meeting, and the answer was, I guess the superintendent will give us the same one, is it could be tomorrow, could be a year from now, we just have no idea. I mean, there are organizations throughout the city that have applied for grants, have been awarded grants, that's been pulled. I'm sure Ms. Mark could talk about that as well. It's just, it's just up in the air at all points in time, so it's just one of those things. Mr. Doherty, go ahead.
Okay.
Well, just to the facilities subcommittee meeting, we had a $15 million grant we were awarded over 3 years to do facilities work, and now we don't know if we're going to get that money. But in terms of our staffing, aren't we required by law for the special education staffing? We have to have those teachers. Some of it, like the Title I funding, is based on the percentage of poverty in the students who come from economically disadvantaged homes. How do we manage cutting $10 million from the budget and stay in compliance with these education laws?
So as you can see, we really have no idea what's coming from the federal government. There are all these big question marks in the air, and the overall effect is this sense of whiplash and an anxiety that our needs won't be met. As I said, Lowell is down, and the federal government is kicking it from every possible direction. Arts, culture, health and safety, access to food, education. So in my opinion, the state of Massachusetts should be doing everything it can to protect itself from these federal cuts. We need to adequately fund our state government so we can absorb the impact from the federal government, but we need to do it fairly. Now, obviously, I'm not about to solve this all right now, but there is one concrete step we can take, and that is to pass the corporate fair share bill. The bill is titled An Act Combating Offshore Tax Avoidance. Basically, right now, there are these large corporations that are making profits in Massachusetts, and then they're hiding those profits in offshore tax havens around the world. This bill would allow us to tax a larger share of those hidden profits and then raise more tax revenue. This would only hit the wealthiest corporations that hide their profits overseas, and it would bring a lot of benefits. The latest estimates I've seen show that passing this bill would raise $400 million a year to fund the services that Massachusetts families need. So, I encourage you to reach out to your state legislators, both your state reps and your state senators, to ask them to co-sponsor this bill. For example, I'm going to call my state senator, Ed Kennedy, because he has not yet co-sponsored. But if your legislators have co-sponsored, like the 3 state reps in Lowell, so thank you, by the way, to Tara Hong, Vinay Howard, and Rodney Elliott. If they've already co-sponsored, then you can ask them to urge the chairs of the Joint Committee on Revenue to pass it favorably out of committee. So the bill's in committee right now. We need to move it forward to be able to put it to a vote. Passing this bill is one simple step we could take to protect ourselves from the current federal administration, because we deserve better than this. And if we take action, we can make things better. So thank you for listening. Keep up the good fight.